Well, I don't know, I guess some of the early days that I can remember is before I started school, my mom hauled my brother to Hinsdale for 4 years to go to school. We never went to school at the State Creek School. But when I started school in '56, my dad took a petition around the neighborhood to get a bus route up there. And we went over to Eaton's to get Bear to sign the petition. I didn't even know anybody lived on the west side of Cache Creek. That was the other side of the world. And when they got the petition signed, then the county built that Keelman Road north of the ranch so that the bus could make a loop to pick up kids, because if you didn't do that, the bus only had to go as far as the second to the last place. So they built that crossroad up there, and then half of the year the bus would go one way, and then the second half of the year it would reverse it and come back the other way. So remember that quite well. And that road was built in the summer of 1956, and it was last year, the spring of '23, is the only time the waters ever ran over that road in the springtime, ever. So that was quite a sight to see. Geez, I don't know, when me and my brother were growing up, we were just all over the hills up around the ranch, running in the sand rocks and trapping skunks out of holes, and we were just all over the place up there. Mom never knew where we were. She was just glad to get us out of the house, I think. But there was an old school bell that was sitting on top of a shed up there. And if she wanted to get a hold of us, you could hear that clear down on Papoose. So if she wanted to round the kids up, she'd go out and ring on that bell out there. And that was time to come home, you know. So, I don't know, the bell's still up there somewhere. Is this still on the garage, Mike?
No, I took it off. It kind of blew off the garage. I'm gonna put it on that lean-to of the house.
I think that bell came from the Fraser Schoolhouse, which is where my dad and my mom went to school, and then my mom taught there for a brief period when right after she got out of high school. They were short of teachers and stuff. She got some sort of a certificate or something to teach school there briefly, but I think that bell came out of the Fraser School. Power line, the ranch was never electrified until 1947 when they ran the REA line up there. And before that, the folks had some kind of a little gas-powered 32-volt generator in the basement. And my brother was just a baby, and Leland Yeoman was working for Dad, and he was staying upstairs in the ranch house, and Kenny started crying and crying and crying, and Mom got up to see what the problem was, and she passed out from carbon monoxide, as well as my dad. And Leland Yeoman happened to make it down from upstairs and got the front door open to get some air in there, or the whole family would have perished. Scary deal. That's when the generator went out. Goodbye. But then they got rural electrification in there, and that was a great thing. Had indoor plumbing in. Had a submersible pump where you pump water electrically. Great. It was a good thing. And I think that's why my dad was so energetic and involved with the rural electrification, is it did so much good for the area. And growing up, we just, like I say, we just run all over the country, but once in a while you go get to visit the neighbors. We'd go to visit the Eatons or the Mogans, or the Mogans would come down, and that usually turned into a fiasco, whoever came by. We would, the fall everybody was canning corn, so we would save all the corn cobs off the thing, dry them off, put them in a big barrel in the barn out there. And then when the time got right, all the neighborhood would show up, and then we'd have a corn cob fight. And When we tore that barn down and lowered the roof on it in the late '80s, there was still corn cob between the walls and stuff in that thing. And it had a third story up in there. It had a hay rack that ran the length of the roof up there to get the loose hay back into it. And we would get up on that third story and run that trolley back and forth, jump on the rope and go the length of the barn and stuff. And we had a lot of fun on it. Till Dad had to put some cables across the barn to keep the walls from spreading on it, and then that kind of shut that down. But, had a lot of fun. And Dad said if you stacked that barn completely full of hay, as much as you could get in it, it would hold 100 tons. And it all had to go down that hole to the basement, and then it all turned into manure, then you had to haul it all out in a wheelbarrow. So it was a lot of work to put hay up in that thing. But, yeah, Grandpa McColly helped. I mean, had a guy. He was lived up on the turnoff going into the Rockford Canyon by the name of Ed Case. And Grandpa hired him, and he built the house, the ranch house up there. And then in 1913, and then in 15, he hired him again to build the barn. And when they put the rafters up, started them up, Grandpa wouldn't let anybody go up there but himself to crawl up on those rafters to tie the first two together so that they could put lumber across there to keep going then. And he said they couldn't have drug him off there. He was hanging on so tight, I don't know how he got anything done, because he said it was spooky. So, and the guy that built that barn, his signature is still on one of the beams down in the basement of it. He had beautiful handwriting, and it's in pencil on one of those beams. When we tore the roof off, it took lowering that roof. Clark Laycock was working for me. And one of the first things we did is took a ladder and cut a hole up in the roof from that third level of it, and put a ladder up there, and we crawled up there and were standing on the roof, and I had a 35mm camera and took a panoramic view of everything from up on top there, and there was hardly any shingles left on it. They were all weathered off, blowed off, but all the shingle nails were still there. So it was pretty spooky standing up there on that thing. I got to thinking to myself, well, if you fall off this thing, you're never going to make it to the edge anyway. It's like Velcro. You just stick there. But anyway, we tore the roof down on that, and disassembled, lowered the wall, and put a new roof on it. It's a nice building though. So. I gave Brady the Grandpa's memoirs that he had written. I'm sure, have you read them? Yeah, that's very interesting. The things they did to keep food on the table. He always said that when he got here, people kept asking him how come he stuck it out and didn't leave, and he said, by the time I got here, I didn't have enough money to leave. So here he was. But when he came from Indiana, he specifically chose that place up there because it was such rough country. He wanted to be a cattleman, and he did want to have some farm ground, but just enough to feed his livestock and that type of thing. So that's why he homesteaded up there where he did. And there's a school section close by and a little 40 of some LU land and this. And then he had some relatives of his come out and homestead surrounding him, and when they proved up, then he bought their shares out for their homesteads out. So he actually kind of started out with 2.5 sections. And of course, these neighbors, their relatives and stuff, they all stayed in the main house up there, but they all had a shack wherever their homestead was, and 8-day clock and a bed. So if the government come along to check on them, the clock was still running. Well, it must be here, So, but it was I don't think that they were the only people that did that. I think there were some other people. That's how they got away with that, but everybody stayed in the main ranch house. But during the war, Second World War came along, then there wasn't any manpower to run the place, to do the farming specifically, but to do the physical labor even for the livestock. So he did many jobs to make ends meet for their family, and I think he eventually had to sell some of those homesteads back to the government to keep going. And I know just a few years before he passed away in '77, he said that he always thought he could have done something to keep from having to sell those pieces of property, but by that time it was too late, so that's just the way it is. Well, okay, back to my younger days. I guess when we were riding the school bus, there were a lot of kids up in that community. I think that by the time the north bus made it up to the end of the run and back down, there was between 25 and 30 kids on that bus. And it was chaotic, to say the least. How could you explain it any different than that? Mogans come down from up north when they had to go to high school. They couldn't go to Snake River School anymore, so they would come down to where the Johnsrud place was on that crossroad and get on the bus there. So if they were coming out in the morning, they'd pick my brother and myself up and go around, and then they'd pick the Mogans up, and then, well, Johnny and Art Arnold's, and some of them would get on over on the west end of that, or the east end of that road sometimes too, and Mogan's over on the west end of it, and then we go down to pick the two Eaton boys up, and Gilbert was sitting there, and Gilbert wasn't a very big kid at that time. He was quite small, and he was sitting in there about the third seat back on the right side one day, and Eaton's get on, and Mike Eaton looked at him, and he just grabbed his face and shoved the back of his head through the window. And geez, Gilbert got his ass chewed out from his folks and from the school district and stuff for breaking the bus window. He was just sitting there. He didn't have a choice. So then one time my brother had a magneto off a 1530 International tractor, and if you touched two of them, then spinning, boy, you could grab somebody, and whoever was the last one, if they weren't grounded out, they got the heck shocked out of them, you know. And it didn't take too long to figure out, you know, either grab the back of the seat or you grab somebody else and pass it on down the line. And we got pretty good at it until Vernon Copenhagen was driving the bus, and Mickey McLeod, and Jack and Erlene McLeod, and the kids lived at that Myers place, which is right just north of where the scale is now. And Mickey McLeod was, oh, I don't know, 3 or 4 years younger than I am. I don't know exactly, but he was not worldly, let's say. And he was sitting in the seat right behind Vernon, who was driving the bus. And there was shit, I don't know, there must have been at least a dozen kids on that bus at that time. Everybody started grabbing everybody else, and somebody grabbed Mickey. He was sitting up front. Well, he stuck his finger behind Vernon's ear, and the spark was about that long between his finger and Vernon's ear, and I'll tell you, we about ditched the bus. That's when Vernon confiscated the magneto. And I'll be darned, at the last day of school that year, Vernon gave the magneto back to my brother. I couldn't believe it. I thought he'd have thrown it in the river. A lot of fun. First year that we was going to school, they had an old second or third hand bus. It was a real rattle trap. And that thing was broke down more than it ran. And Vernon Copenhaver had a black and white Corvair car. And he would run that as a bus route, and he'd pick up McCollies and Eatons and just a bunch of, there might be 8 or 10 of us kids in that little Corvair going back to school. And my seat was on a Prestone can under the dash. I was one of the smaller ones, so I got stuffed under there, sitting on a Prestone can. Yeah, oh, front wheel fell off of that bus one time going up by the Cameron place. Wheel bearings went over, no tire goes over, lands over there by the fence. It was just broke down all the time. We did a lot of trapping up there, just small animals and stuff. The skunks out in the point, on the sandrock ledges on that Judith formation, they get holes back in there, and there were some skunk nets, and we used to have a lot of skunks up there. I think that one summer my dad shot 11 of them in the yard, eating out of the cat dishes and stuff. And anyway, my brother set a little trap in this hole, and then one night David Black came up to stay with him. John Fogren was with me over to stay a night or two up there. I went out to check these traps, and Mom, because I had company and stuff, she wouldn't let us take a gun out. Afraid we was gonna, something happen. So my brother had this bayonet knife. He had this old skunk by its front foot in his trap, so he sneaks over the edge of that sand rock and was gonna whack that skunk, and he did. And when he hit that skunk in the head, it did a handstand, and he let him have it. So he had to stay outside most of the evening, and took a while to get where he could stand to be around him. The rest of us scattered. We didn't want to be around him either. I guess I spent a lot of time with my grandpa McColly before I went to school. And at that time he was retired. Grandma had passed away. She died in '57, but I spent a lot of time with him. I think because my mother needed the rest and relaxation, to be honest with you. But we did a lot of fishing, and he had an old boat that he made out of an army barge called the Betty Judell. Took a car roof and put on it, so it was actually a cabin cruiser as such. And we kept it in the river in the summertime, and we'd go fishing. And I made a cast off at one time and lost the whole reel and the whole shooting match in it in the creek, in the river. Grandpa got a boat hook out and fished around. By golly, he didn't pick it up. And I got to playing with that thing, and in the bottom of that handle, you could unscrew a cap, and there's like a secret, I suppose it's to hold tackle in or something. And I discovered that secret compartment and told him about it. When he passed away, he had all of his fishing rods there, and my dad and my uncle were sitting in there. I said, "Yeah, this one's got a secret compartment." And I then took the cap off it, and Grandpa put a little note in there that was to be mine because of the secret compartment. I think I ended up giving it to Mike for a birthday present one time. I don't know whether he still got it or not, but I remember, and I don't remember what year that was. I'm guessing it was probably 54 or 5 or somewhere in there. Grandpa had set minnow traps in at the canal or the creek or something, whatever, down at Rock Creek. And said, "Well, if you don't catch a minnow in an hour, you just will take your trap out and go somewhere else, because there isn't any there." But he took me up the first time I'd ever been to the Rock Creek Dam and to put a minnow trap in up there. And as I remember, the Rock Creek Dam at that time, it had washed out, and there was a kind of a row of pilings driven down the middle of it and stuff, and then they had some hay bales and that kind of crap to try to divert the water. Of course, it got built up better years after that, and then deteriorated, and they added to it. And But just this summer in August, we had a company come in and put a whole new 6-inch cap over the face and the top of that thing, and that should last for many, many, many years, you know. Very, very good job done, and it needed to be done, so that's kind of my story of that. But that's the first I remember of the Rock Creek Dam, and I was not very old. The only thing there was some pilings and stuff driven in a line down there that they built the dam around, and it had washed out, obviously, so. My grandpa inherited the Lannon place down there in late 40s. I don't remember exactly what year it was. The lady that used to run the hotel in Hinsdale, Mrs. E.M. Lannon, owned that property, and Grandpa kind of looked after her and befriended her and stuff. And when she passed away, she willed that property to Grandpa. So that was about the first time that the McColly Ranch ever had some stable hay ground, and it was a wonderful, wonderful thing. But to get the hay in and out of there was a little different deal. The present Rock Creek Bridge wasn't put in until '58, and you either had to go down just a couple miles north of the river, north of Hinsdale, and take a road that went east, and there was an old wooden bridge there that you crossed, and it rattled and banged, and you didn't know if you were going to make it or not. But then you had to go back up, follow the canal back up on a gumbo road, or you could come in from the north and come across the hills and go down through the Littlefield crossing, which was just below the Rock Creek Dam. But both of those were fair weather things, you know. It was not a good deal to be hauling hay over. In '58, summer '58, my dad was he had to haul his hay on a old Studebaker truck with a stock rack on it, and he'd pile it in loose and stack it in there as tight as he could get it, and haul it home with this Studebaker truck that didn't have a hoist on it. He had a sling built in it, so he tied it to a tractor or something. Then he'd pull his hay out of there. Well, every time he did that, the truck would go over center, and the front wheels would come off the ground about 6 feet. When the hay hit the ground, the old truck would just smash down, you know. That's just the norm. One day he went back down to haul another load one morning, and the bridge wasn't there. Lightning had hit some of those 12x12 wooden beams up above, and the whole bridge collapsed during the night. So then we had to go through Hinsdale to get back around there then. But they brought that bridge in from Fraser area and put that there in the fall of '58. That's when that became there. That was really advantageous to us because and they built the road across from the Rock Creek Road to where the highway is now because of that bridge there. It goes down a section line. And then, boy, it's convenient, except that most of our property's on the east side of the bridge, so sometimes if you're moving livestock and big machinery, it doesn't fit across the bridge. But it's sure been a blessing for us anyway.
Do you have any stories about Mick?
Huh?
Do you have any stories about Mick?
Well, yeah, we were very good friends. Did a lot of team roping together and that kind of brandings and that kind of stuff. Mick was 6 years older than I was, so I was just a punk kid when he was growing up and playing basketball and the likes. But after he got done teaching and moved back to the ranch, then we became very good friends and pretty close and helped each other out. And
the Democrat wagon?
Huh?
Tell them about the Democrat wagon and the horses.
Yeah, my dad had bought what they call a Democrat wagon from Claire Duncan up there in a sale. The wagon itself wasn't any good, but the running gear was in exceptionally good shape. So one winter I decided I'd rebuild that thing, and got the running gear all painted up and oiled up, and built a new oak box on it, and had Evelyn Bile repad some seats on the thing, and then Roger Reinhardt had a shaft for it, and it had a pole. It had shafts, and refinished those things, and Roger Reinhardt gave me a pole for it. So I decided to put it in the 4th of July parade, and Mick had this horse, supposedly a nice tame horse. And it was, I guess, at the time. It was pretty showy, but we didn't have a collar on it that was the right size for the horse. But so there was a 2-seater, and we were in the parade, and I think Sharon and Mick and Dana and I were on this thing, and we were doing very nice. And, the horse behaved itself. There was a lot of antique cars that had been refinished and was in the parade. And after the parade was over, they were all parked along Main Street up in Hinsdale, and then Mick was giving people rides in this wagon around town, and my mother for one, and some others. And anyway, things were going real good until a couple knothead kids that I won't name names threw a string of firecrackers out in front of this horse.
Oh no.
And that horse started rearing and backing up, and he backed one of the back wheels of that wagon right over the top of the rear fender that the president of the Glasgow Bank had just got done refurnishing, and it didn't do it a lot of good. But my mom jumped out and chewed those 2 kids' ass. Then I took that wagon to Glasgow to a centennial parade, or Glasgow, I think it was a Glasgow Centennial, I think that's what it was. And I went over to, Ed Bundas lived at the Nemont Manor at that time. I wanted to pick him up. He was an old timer that worked around the country and helped me do a lot of things mechanically and not so much physically, but he traveled with me a lot in Masonic Lodge and whatever. And while I was over at the Nemont Manor parking lot over there, something happened, and this horse started rearing up and backing up, and I snapped the reins on his ass, and he went over backwards inside the shafts and stuffed one of those shafts right up in through his side up here. So we got it all back, got him all out of the harness and got him back standing up and put him back in there. And Bundas went in and got a bolt and a screwdriver and a drill, and we bolted the thing together, and away we went on the parade. And I kept seeing people pointing, I guess it was the right side that shaft went in. People were over here pointing. What the heck? And everybody over there was waving and waving. These people were, Well, this shaft that went in, I went through his ribs and stuff. And he wasn't running a steady stream of blood out of him, but he was dripping awfully fast, But by the time we got done with the parade, the horse was settled down. And one of the local veterinarians in Glasgow saw what was going on. He came over to the fairgrounds, and he even sewed the dang horse up for nothing, for being such a good guy. And then the horse was all swelled up in the chest. So I had to take the horse home and take care of it, doctor it, and feed it for about 3 or 4 or 5 weeks. And it healed up enough to, I took it back over to Mick. And the next week he took her to the sale and sold the bugger. Why did you do it before I dumped a bunch of money into him, Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. So your dad was the youngest of 4?
What's that?
Your dad was the youngest of 4 kids, was it?
Yeah.
Did you guys spend much time with your aunts and uncle?
Yeah, well, my Aunt Donna she was born before the grandparents left Indiana. I think she was born in 2000, and they came out she was born in 5. So she was 5 or 6 years old when they came out to Homestead. And then Jay Clark was born here. And he was, I think he's probably 3 years younger than Donna. And then Gertrude was, I think, Jay was born 3. I think there's about 12 years difference between Uncle Jay and my dad, and Gertrude was about 4 years probably behind Jay. I'm not sure of that, but I think there's about 12 years difference between my mom and dad, or my uncle and dad. And I think Dad was kind of a Johnny-come-lately. I'm not sure of that, but anyway, I don't know what the deal riff was, but sometimes him and his father didn't see exactly eye to eye. I guess it's a polite way of saying it. And he, for reasons untold or unknown, my dad did not finish high school here. He went to Newburgh, Oregon, and I don't know why he was, but he did get he did graduate high school out of Oregon.
Newport, wasn't it?
But he said that, and my dad, he was a man of his own, I can tell you that. He decided one time he was going to go, he didn't have any money or anything to speak of, or before he left the place. So he's going to hitchhike around the United States. And I guess he did, I don't know. He ended up in Kentucky anyway, in Harlan County, Kentucky, and I don't know where else he was at, but he did this all in like 3 or 4 weeks. And he had a few stories to tell about that, and said he couldn't catch a ride in this Kentucky, and said there's this old feller over here with a mule pulling a plow. And so he went over to talk to that guy, and he said that guy didn't have a tooth in his head, he didn't think, but he was very pleasant. And he said they got to talking, and Dad asked him if he'd ever traveled at all. Oh yeah, he says. He had a cousin that lived about 1.5 miles down the road that way, and he had another cousin that lived about the same distance up that way, and he'd been to both places. So he was well traveled. Then the war came along. My dad was in the Seattle area, and he kind of got interested in that. He was kind of kicking around, wasting time, I guess, and helped. There was some guy that was rebuilding a boat, and he helped him build a new wooden mast for it and stuff, and they got to talking. And anyway, the war came along, and Dad signed up with the Army Transport Service at that time, which was the predecessor to the U.S. Merchant Marines. But at the time it started, it was the Army Transport Service. He spent a couple years in the South Pacific and New Guinea and Australia and New Zealand and down in there, and then he got transferred up into the Aleutians for some time, and he'd worked his way up. I think he got to be at least a first mate and maybe a captain on a boat, on some of the boats he was working on. Had a couple boats that got sunk on him that he was on when he was in the South Pacific, but he said that never brought it. He had a trunk full of memorabilia that he had. So one of them was a hand-woven hammock net, and I don't remember what it all was, but some of his navigational equipment and that type of stuff. But he said that one boat that sank on him, he could have got his gear off of there, but nobody else could. So he just let his go with it. So, but he never talked a whole lot about his military career other than good things. He never, I don't know, he was never in action as such. Most of the time he was either transporting not necessarily equipment, but supplies to troops. or when he was up in Alaska, he was working and running on this boat that was transporting dignitaries and that type of thing. That I don't know whether they were on R&R or they were actually to be going somewhere to do. I don't know that, but down when he was in the South Pacific, mostly he's transporting equipment and supplies and stuff to troops down there. He came home. He wanted to go to. He got married to Mom in '44, before the war was over, and he'd been up in Alaska enough to know that what he wanted to do was move up there and start a cattle ranch on one of the islands in the Aleutians. And things were going good. He had his wife and he was all ready to go until his mother found out about it. And she says, there is not going to be one of my grandkids born in Alaska. And that was pretty much the end of that. But then my granddad got, I think that his ailment, he got prostate cancer and had to go to Galen for some time on that. And when that happened, he couldn't run the place, so my father took over that. And then in just a few years, he had signed a note on it to buy the thing from his father. So then I came along. Well, my brother came along. He didn't care much about farming and ranching. He wasn't a farm and ranch kid, and I loved it. So I went to college in 1968 and was doing all right. I enjoyed the extracurricular activity a lot, but I was doing all right. And the military draft came up at that time, and I wasn't, a lot of my friends were getting drafted into the Army, and they were over in the rice paddies in Vietnam. And I had made up my mind that I wasn't going to do that. So I'd signed with a recruiter to join the Navy, but I didn't have to go until I wanted to go. And I had my physical done, and all I had to do was tell a recruiter, let's go. But they started the draft at that time, which was basically a big old lottery. You know, they had 365 ping pong balls, and as they drew them out, whatever number was, that was the number of the day of the year, you know. Anyway, when mine came along, I was sitting in the dorm TV room watching this thing, and went through the first 100, and I thought, geez, did I fall asleep? I missed it, you know. I think they were only taking up to 150 that year, 150 days. But then I missed the second 100, and then I missed the third 100, and I knew I'd screwed up. But my lottery number came up 307, and I knew that there wasn't any way that they were going to draw more than 150 out of that. So I did not have to get drafted. So I did not serve in the military. For two reasons. I didn't think my dad could run the place by himself, which was a fallacy at that time. But there was a young girl, blonde girl in Hinsdale that I didn't know if she's going to stick around if I was gone for a couple, 3 years. So, and that was a big determining factor. But she did, at least for 52. We're hoping for a whole lot more, but yeah. But not going to the military was one of my regrets, I can say that. I don't know if there's much else I can add to any of this or not.
Well, did you know your mom's family much?
My mother's family?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was a relatively big family. They lived 3 miles south of the ranch. And,
so that been your closest neighbors then?
yeah, pretty much, yeah, the closest inhabited neighbor at that time, yeah. They had 3 boys and 3 girls, and my mom was the oldest girl and the 3rd child. Or was she older than Harold?
No.
I don't think so. I think that it was Eldon and then Harold and then Mom. And but when the war came along, she stayed out of school for 2 years to help her father farm the place because the 2 older boys they were in the army together. Well, they weren't together, but they were wherever they went in the world. One followed the other, and by about 2 weeks, they were in North Africa and all over the place, working on, I don't know whether they might have been no, I think they were Army, but they were airplane mechanics and that type is what they were doing. But Mom stayed out of school for a couple of years, so she was actually about 20 or something like that when she went back. When she graduated from high school, because she had stayed out of school those 2 years to help on the place. And, then my granddad always thought that Dad was going to marry somebody some way the heck out of the country or something like that. And then he married the closest gal there was there. So that worked out good. Yeah, we own, the ranch owns all of those places and the Tuttle places and the Kelly places, and my mother's mother was a Kelly, and their homestead was just, we own that place too, but her brother lived on that, and Grandma's brother lived on that place, as well as his dad until he passed away. Mr. and Mrs. James Kelly, I never knew him. He died before I was born, but his wife, Amelia, I think it is, I've got pictures of her where she was holding me when I was maybe a year old. I was just a baby, and I think she died in 51 or 2, 51 I think, something, so. But yeah, Dad bought those places from them and made the place bigger. And then in 1970 we had a chance to, one of the neighbors on Cash Creek there his son was in dirt moving and other jobs, and was not doing well, and fellow from Malta needed to sell that property to bail his son out. So he offered it to Dad, and Dad jumped on that, and that increased our holdings considerably. A lot more farm ground and considerably more grass too. So that's when the McColly Ranch expanded to 300 or 400 to 500 head of cows, and probably at least tripled our farm ground at that time. So then here comes bigger equipment and bigger tractor, and then it was too much tractor for the toolbar, so then you had to get a bigger toolbar, and then you find out the tractor isn't big enough for that toolbar, so you have to buy another tractor. And yeah, the mechanization really kicked in at that time.
When did you guys get the grazing up north?
Grandpa got that in 47 also, I believe, from a guy by the name of Louis Ackland, A-C-K, I don't think it was L-A-N-D, L-U-N-D, Louis Ackland was the guy's name. There was a 2-story house down on the creek, and a shack and a barn up on the hill up above there to the east, and that's where he lived. And come to find out, this 2-story house came from up the creek, up on Bluff Creek, about half a mile further north. And I drug it down there for the sole purpose of trapping badger before they were prime. And then they were feeding these badgers in this house until they got cold and primed up. And then they would kill them and skin them. Well, when my grandparents got the place, then Grandma and Grandpa moved up there and spent some time during the summer or two, or a couple summers, and fixed the place up to where it was habitable, you know. And after they moved back out of there, then my dad hired just a old-time cowboy, I guess you could call it, you know. There was a lot of people in the area at that time that they were just saddle bums, basically, I guess you could say. They worked for somebody during the summer months, and then in the fall they'd get their pay and move into the hotel in Hinsdale and stay there until spring and go back and work for somebody. And that's kind of the way this guy was. He was specifically up there to go around the fences, make sure the fences were up, and to scatter bulls so that the bulls were all standing in the corner of the fence somewhere, the cows or something. And Lou Balky was his name. He was quite an old guy. He'd stay up there for about 3 months during the summer, and then he'd come down and stay at the ranch house with the folks for several weeks before he moved into town and stayed in the hotel during the wintertime. He died in 1960. But when we went up there, his old work hat with the Montana crease was still hanging behind the door up there. And my brother wore that for, I don't know if there was head lice or fleas in it or not, but there sure could have been. he was a pretty rough count, but he had an old yellow tomcat, old Tommy Sweetheart. He fed that cat nothing but pink salmon. And he always said, oh yeah, Tommy, he never gets on the table. But Mom would haul groceries up to him about once a week, and fresh water and cream cans full of water and whatever groceries he needed. But he'd get those 1 pound tins of Sunny Jim strawberry jam in a metal can about that big around. And there was always a ring of cat hair around the lip of that strawberry jam can, and the butter always had holes in it. So I think Tommy Sweetheart must have got on the table a time or two. I don't know.
So all those years you guys trail those cattle up, and that's what, a 3-day process?
Yeah. Yeah, we take off and go up there, and they stayed a lot later in the fall. In those days we didn't have as many cattle, so I think Dad probably only ran maybe 60, 70 head of cattle at that time. Trail them up there, and then he stayed with them and come back down late in the fall. The first year they were going to come down, they were all set. They were going to camp on the trail coming back down and all that. And Mom was going to repaint the house while they were gone for the 3 days it took. And there was a storm blew in, and those cows ran all the way home, and that bunch of cows rolled into the yard about 11 o'clock that night. And Mom had the whole house door apart, got to repaint it. You know? Those old cows had enough of that north country. They're getting the heck back down here.
So who else ran cattle up there by you?
Well, to the south of us was Man Simmons, and Gene Bile owned that property I think he got that in the early 50s, 52 or 3 or somewhere in there. And old Pete Larson owned the place north of us, and it went right to the Canadian line. And he would come down and live in just north of town here during the winter time and stuff. But he stayed up in the summer. He had hay ground up there. Both those operations had hay ground and the likes, you know. But yeah, they were good people. I remember that Pete Larson. He had a John Deere tractor, and he rode that thing from the Canadian line back down to here every fall, so he'd had some power and when he needed it down here. But it never had a road gear, and it had only went about 7 miles an hour. And he bought that one down one year. I remember it was cold. And he kind of a burly old guy and kind of had a jacket, but it was big hairy chest. His hair was always sticking out. I don't know whether the coat didn't button up or that's just the way he was or something. But he stopped in at the place there. Of course, anybody that went by the ranch, they stopped at mealtime. They either get coffee or most everybody stopped and Mom and cooking dinner or supper or whatever. Anyway, he was about froze out by the time he got there that one day. He come in for dinner and he says to Daddy, one of these times I'm going to have to put the road gear in that, he says. But he never did. That's a long way out. That's 50 miles or better up there. That's 7 miles an hour, so.
So how did you guys sell the calves back then?
Well, I guess I never had a whole lot to do with that, Brady, and I think that most of them got run into town here. Nobody had any. Well, there was a few trucks with stock racks, but dang few at that till the 50s. But they'd trail them in, and there were some stockyards over here at Hinsdale, and there was a scale there, and they'd put them on, bring them in there, and load them on box cars, and a lot of them would go to Sioux City or to Chicago to the sales barns and stuff, and the people that were shipping those cattle, and they would ride with the cattle in the caboose in the end of the train so they could look after them. And but I don't know, Dad did that a time or two, I think, but when I was growing up, there was always one cattle barn. I can't remember what his name was, but he bought Dad's calves for years and years and years. Same guy, always. And the first year or two he came out to look at them. Dad took him out and he showed him the cows and the calves, and after about the second year of that, he always made it there for dinner time so he'd get something to eat. And he says, I don't need to go look at your cattle, I already know what they are. So we get a free meal, and the guy would offer him whatever for the livestock, and I guess if it was all right with Dad, he just took it and that was it. I mean, they basically a word of mouth and a handshake, and there you go. Yeah. So, but yeah, I know that same guy bought Dad's cattle for years and years, and it wasn't until, and it was pretty near all Hereford cattle at that time, and it wasn't until mid 60s was about the first I remember. Claire Duncan had some Angus cattle up there, Angus bulls and stuff, and they started crossbreeding those Hereford cows with black bulls, and boy, that made a wonderful cross. And it wasn't long until most everybody was crossbreeding at that time, and but that was about the best cross that we ever had, was the black white faced calves and stuff. And the cows would come grow up and they'd have pigment around their eyes, and their udders were usually discolored so they wouldn't get sunburnt tits in the spring on snow. The calves, if the cow got their tits sunburnt or something, then they'd kick the calves off because the bag hurt. It just solved a lot of problems with crossbreeding. And then in about 69 or 70, then everybody started throwing some exotics into the herds, and some of that turned out quite well, and some of it was not so good. It just depends on the strains you got, and and the genetics on it. But there was I know we did Maine Anjou, and we did Charolais, and we did Semitol, and some of those breeds that we had just didn't work out very good for us. And finally we settled down, and it's our whole herd is a Black Angus, Black Simmental cross, and we seem to get along very well with that. The cows are of the right size and the right mentality, and yeah, but there were some of those exotic breeds that didn't work very well for us anyway. Some of the neighbors got by quite well, but we didn't. So
I remember Dad saying that Mogan's had some interesting things when he started running that.
oh yeah.
I think he said there might have been some Brahma in there.
Oh
And
yeah, there was a
one.
hot deal. Alex had bought, I don't know, Kenny Stahl was buying cattle for somebody. Some out of down Texas area or some damn thing. I don't know. And you should be talking to Gilbert Mogan about this. He's got the whole story. But
I think there was also a beefalo running around when my dad first started that.
what's that?
I think there was a beefalo running around for a little
Oh
while.
yeah, that was
That
part
was
of
pretty
that
mangy
deal
looking.
too. Yeah, that thing you couldn't keep it anywhere. It was always out on the highway. Go out there. Somebody called me. They go out there with them. Finally got to where they just heard it with a shotgun, and that thing. I don't know how many times they got shot in the butt with a shotgun. They finally. In 1976, the Hinsdale area had a bicentennial get-together, and Johnny Mogan decided he was going to donate that beefalo, huge animal, for the meat for the community barbecue. So Tom Nelson and Gilbert Mogan, they were going to go shoot this thing. They were bidding. That was in. That wasn't 76, that was 81. It was in 81 was when they were going to, it was an all-school reunion in 1981. And that beefalo was going to be the meat for the barbecue. So Tom Nelson and Gilbert Mogan went to shoot this animal, and it was clear up in that Willow Creek country way the heck and gone up there. That was the year they built the North Border pipeline through, gas pipeline. So there wasn't any gates or fences, but it was all a pipeline trail from about where this animal was to Jim Art's over there on the Frenchman, and he was going to process this thing, butcher it, and grind it up or whatever they were going to cut it up. So Tom had this, I don't know what he was shooting, probably a 25-06 or something like that. And he was deadly with it. He was driving nails with that, Gilbert said. He shot that animal and it didn't even hardly blink. And it looked to take off. And so then Tom shot a leg out from underneath the thing, and then was still going, and he said he shot another leg out from underneath it. Anyway, they finally got the dang thing dead. But in the meantime, it got to a cut bank and rolled over this cut bank and was upside down in this old creek bed or cut bank or something anyway. And they went over, and this thing was so massive that you couldn't even turn it or do anything to it. It was just a huge, huge animal. So they started quartering this up, and I don't know if they ever did get all the meat. I think probably there was still some meat left up there when they got done, but they took as much as they could get. They got the hindquarters and the upper shoulder off of it, and I don't know. He said when they skinned it out, you couldn't even. It was so heavy you couldn't even pick the hide up. You know, it was just massive. Well, and it was pretty hot weather at that time, but they got that thing to pick up and took off right straight over for Jim Art's on his pipeline, and got it over there where they could get it in a cooler. Well, come to find out, when they were grinding this thing up for the hamburger and whatever they was doing, maybe they were going to grind the whole thing up, I don't know. But Jim Art had this big meat grinder. And it's about every 2 or 3 minutes I'd have to stop and clean all the lead shot out of the grinder. I think had so much lead in it from shooting it off the highway and stuff. Gilbert, you need to talk to Gilbert about that sometime. He could tell you all about that episode.
Do you remember any sheep in the country?
Well, I remember the ones my wife had. Yeah, there was sheep. The Claire Duncan that I was referring to that lived up on Crow Creek up there, he was a sheep man in the early days before he started getting livestock. Well, there was a lot of people up in that North Country. That country was pretty suitable for sheep because it was so rocky and, you know, it was kind of sheep country. There was quite a few up there. It was all open range at that time, so I guess they just had herders to keep them around. And, but yeah, there was a lot of big cattle operators up there that started out with sheep. My dad said he had some sheep one time. I don't remember how many head he bought, but he said he bought them on the first day of October, or first day of September, I guess, for $6 a round, and sold them on the first day of October for $9 a head. So he said there was nothing wrong with sheep as far as he was concerned.
Yeah.
But Mike had some sheep for a FFA project, and Dana thought that she could have sheep or two too, so they got to be where they were in the sheep industry. And
Got them from your father.
yeah, well, if you got 5 sheep, you just as well have 500, because then you can afford to fence for them. Those miserable things were out there in the barley field tromping and stomping on it and eating it, and then they go over in the hay yard and eat and stomp and tromp around there. And every gate in the place up there had wool around and barbs about that big around where they're crawling through it. And then Dana was feeling sorry for them, so she'd go over to the grain bin and get some grain, and she was graining them too. Well, pretty soon they were about that big around. Things were pretty good until lambing time came along, and things didn't go so good. Lost quite a few lambs and maybe a ewe or something. And so we found out that it doesn't hurt to starve profit into a sheep. But yeah, just 5 sheep is no good, not at all.
There's not a lot of timber up in the North Country. Did any of those guys use those poor coal seams up there in the homestead days?
The coal?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was the neighborhood there around where Grandpa lived, and south of there some. It was really poor coal up in Rock Creek Canyon. And they would go up in the fall for a while, 3 or 4 days, 5 days, something. And somebody had a team of mules, and I don't know who it was, but they'd take these up there and keep them. They had it over, this coal vein was down over the bank of the hill, probably 20 feet down or something, I don't know, more than, but it was only maybe a 6-inch vein, and it was black dirt basically. It wasn't really good, it was not very good coal at all, but it beat nothing. So the neighborhood would get together and go up there, and they had an overhead line from down where this vein was built to go, and they'd use these mules. They had a barrel or something that they had on this cable that went up, and these mules would pull this barrel up over the top of their wagon so they could dump it and send the barrel back down. And yeah, the neighborhood would get together and do that until they had all they wanted. And the last time they did that, in 1936, my dad said, they were up there and they were just cleaning up, getting ready to go. And this guy by the name of Ernest Dietert, who lived a couple miles south of the ranch, was up there, and Dad said he wore bib overalls and had a little pair of wire rim glasses and stuff, and he had them in his bib pockets and stuff, but he was down on his hands and knees picking and chipping at this, just filling a 5-gallon bucket, killing time while everybody else was taking care of whatever they had to do up above. And anyway, while he was down there, the bank caved off on him from up above and come down, and Dad said he was over by on the east side of Rockrick over there somewhere chasing some horses that he knew was over there, and he rode back across there about the time after this had happened, and they were searching for the guy. And when that bank had caved off, Dad said that he'd taken off rolling on his side to get away from this, and he said if he'd have made one more roll, he'd have been over the edge and away from it, but it covered him up. And he said that when they got him out of there, he said the glasses in his bib pockets weren't even broken. So it just covered him up and suffocated him. And that was the last time anybody went back up in that country to mine coal there. Laycock family had a coal mine just across the ridge to the south of where that one was, and they might have mined some of that coal later than that, but it wouldn't have been a whole lot. There was an old sheep wagon that was always over there that they kind of stayed in up there when they were doing that on the Laycock side. I don't know. I guess I could probably relay this story. It was told to me by a guy that is no longer with us, and I guess it would probably be safe enough to say now. I don't know. Maybe you want to edit it out. Anyway, for years after that, that sheep wagon was up there, but it was just kind of like the running gear, and it was, it was just deteriorated. There wasn't much there. And I was sitting at the Legion Hall one day talking, chewing fat with Lloyd Jones, and he's a son of Harvey Jones, who was the son of Frank Jones that owned up most of that country up in there to start with. And, Lloyd was the kind of guy, he was just, I don't know, he just got kicked around the community up there. He was kind of his own, he just take off from home and go live with the neighbors or shack up with some old hired man somewhere or do, he's just kind of a freelance guy. And we were talking about those coal mines up there, and I said, yeah, I said, there was a sheep wagon up there that Laycock used. Yeah, he says, I know all about that. He says, I said, well, I don't know. I says, as I understand it, the thing caught on fire or something. And he says, well, it's not exactly, he says. Apparently the Laycocks had some dynamite up there that they were using to mine their coal and blow overburden and the likes off and stuff. And apparently Lloyd came along there one day and found this dynamite. And he blew their sheep wagon all to smithereens. So that was the end of the sheep wagon. That must probably about the last time the Laycocks mined coal up there too. I don't know. But yeah. Yeah, Lloyd said he's just a kid. And he said, well, I don't know if he ever told it. I probably shouldn't have been saying that because I don't think his family knows about it.
Oh dear.
Yeah, dynamite was a little more common back then.
Oh yeah, everybody could get dynamite. You could just go to the hardware store and buy cases of dynamite. And my dad used to do a lot of dynamiting, blowing dams and stuff like that, getting rid of bad dams and that type of stuff. Yeah, he just went to the grocery store or a hardware store and bought a case of dynamite and the caps and fuse, whatever you wanted, didn't matter. When we were on a FFA, the FFA used to take trail rides up through the canyon and stuff on horseback and camp up there for a couple nights and 3 days and that kind of stuff. But that one year, Lloyd Jones was chaperoning these kids along with myself, and I don't even remember maybe Carolyn Shockley was there kind of looking after the girls' side and stuff, but that Lloyd was a world of information about that canyon. I mean, he grew up his whole life there and he knew everything about it. And we were riding up through the bottom of that canyon one time. We were getting about to where Frank Jones's horse corral used to be, and Lloyd says, "Yeah, there we had old Grandpa had a old sheep herder or somebody hired one time, kind of an I don't know whether he was white or native or both, or I don't know, but he says he carved an Indian's head in the side of a sandstone up here." And I said, "Really?" "Yeah," he says, "right up there." I'll be danged. We rode right up to that thing and you could still tell it was an Indian's head in this sand rock, you know. I mean, the thing stuck out as like a 3D picture, you know. It was amazing. That damn Lloyd, after 30 or 40 years, yeah, it's right up there. Lloyd rode up there. I would never be able to get you back to where it is now, you know. I was in the canyon a lot, you know. I was very familiar with the canyon, but I can't remember. It was on the east side of the creek, but I can't remember just where it is. But I'll bet you if you went up there to that spot, you could still tell that, because it's, you know, those sand rocks are overhang, so that it doesn't just erode from the rainwater, basically, you know. It's the wind and stuff that does that, but I'll bet you can still tell that it's there. You know, that was, golly, that would have been in 78 or 9 or somewhere in there when, at that time, when we were going down that canyon, going up the canyon, which is, so that's been 40 years ago, 45 years ago or better, 50 years ago now, 45. But I'll bet you could still tell that it was there. But I don't know of anybody else that would know where it was. I don't, unless Billy Pratt happened to be along there and see it one time. But, because I don't think that Mike Jones would know. I don't think Lloyd ever took him there, as far as I know. But, yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, it was right up there. Well, let's go look at it. Okay. That's all it was that. You know, he was just that Lloyd was just a world of information about stuff like that. We did, my brother and I, and what year was that? 78 maybe, spring of 78. We were down on Cache Creek and gathering the creek for some reason, riding on horseback and riding along, and we had an old fence line that run up over the hill from west to east. We were kind of riding through that area, and I don't know if the wire was off of that fence line at that time or not. I think it probably was. It was in dishevels anyway. And my brother says, "Hell, there's a grave right there." And you look at it, but sure enough, you know, I mean, there's no doubt about it being a grave. And I asked my grandfather about it. He was one of the first ones in that area at that time, and he had never heard of anybody that had passed away. You know, it was a relatively old grave. And I asked John Valentine, who was an old timer around the area too, cowboy, and rode for everybody, and nothing rang a bell with him either. So the best we can think of is perhaps in the early days or something. And I don't think it was an Indian grave, because there's a black sand rock, or not sand rock, but a black rock about that thick, that's straight up walls, and then it's peaked to the top, you know, like a tombstone. And if you get on a cloudy day, you get just right, and you can see there's like a tic-tac-toe thing that's turned a quarter of a turn on it or something. So it's an X, and in one of those squares you can kind of see like a J or something. But the funny part about that design on that is it stands out from the rock instead of indented into it, like somebody had scratched it in there. So it's like it had been painted, and the rest of the rock had weathered away from that design. And on a bright sunshiny day, you can't see it, but you take an umbrella or something like that and cover up to where it's in the shade, and I took Tom Nelson up there and showed him the thing, and he agreed. And then out on the river out here, Keith Bile owns the property now. Swanson's owned it for years. There's a grave out there that Tom Nelson showed me that it was a trooper that I think that of Ladder. It was after Sitting Bull had been going through here anyway, after the Custer Massacre, and they were stationed at Fort Peck, as we understand it, the best we can come up with. And he made it this far, and he had pneumonia or something and passed away out here. And they buried him up on this thing, and Tom had told me about this thing, and he says somebody needs to know about this thing. He tried to research it one time, and couldn't get very far with military records and stuff. But then a few years ago, our ex-sheriff Glenn Meyer, he's kind of into that sort of stuff, and I was telling him about this grave, and he kind of wanted to research it some more, and with the idea of putting a fence around the thing and if we could find out a name, you know, put a military stone there type of thing. So he started pursuing it a little bit, and when he was a sheriff, he knew a lot of connections with the service and their, you know, I don't know what branch it is, but where they're locating MIAs and that type of, you know what I'm saying? I don't know what you call it. Add it in. Tell me what it is. Anyway, this guy is out of Billings, I believe, and then there was an archaeologist out of Havre area, I believe. Anyway, he got those two guys together one day, and we goes up there and gets Keith to go up there with us, and there were several, Keith and Glenn and I and these two guys, and I don't know who else was there. Maybe Ed Bile was there or something. Anyway, this guy goes over to his pickup and gets a screen that's on a sandbox, and this grave is, well, it's mostly just a pile of rocks, you know, and then a bunch of currant bushes started growing up in the thing. There's no headstone or nothing. But he gets and he starts scratching around this thing and throws a little bit of dirt on the screen and shakes it. And there was a little bit of didn't look like nothing to me, but yeah, he says, this is a grave. He says, that's a little bone out of your arm. And he says, the reason I know that is I just broke mine last summer, you know. But then this guy from Billings, he's kind of pursuing it too. I've got some of the correspondence between Glenn and him and all of those guys. And but when I took Glenn over to that and showed it to him and told him about it, then I says, I got another grave up on our place. I'll take you up there. So, hey, he had a metal detector, Glenn did, and he could detect some iron out here too. That was some metal, as well as that archaeologist could also. You know, what we were kind of looking for is like a button off military jacket or some type of thing like that. And we never did find anything or dig it. Just, you know, you could tell there was something there. But Glenn went up and looked. We took him over and showed him that grave on Cache Creek, and there, yeah, he says, there's no doubt in my mind that isn't a grave, but nobody knows who it is or what it is, or never will, probably. Only thing we could figure is in the early days, some damn trapper or something, you know. I don't think it's an Indian grave because it's got the headstone on it, but that's the best we could figure out. It had to been. We assume it's non-native, and who else would have been there if it hadn't have been for some hunters or trappers or something in that area, you know. That maybe somebody made the other guy mad and got. Maybe he wanted his coat and it was getting winter time, so Didn't even get his coat. Yeah, but that's all we could guesstimate is it had to be a Christian grave to have a headstone buried and have a head, and it's still completely covered with rocks and everything. It's not weathered down at all. So, but we never. And I took my dad and my uncle over there one time when we was kicking around the hills, and I was showing them things that I had found. And Dad said that he never knew of anything like that either. And Jake, they were both. I took them down, and we found a medicine wheel on the Tuttle place down there. And I took Tom out there that one day. We went on an archaeological tour. He was going to show me stuff that he knew, and then I ended up showing him stuff that I knew. And when we got back to town, he says, "I think you showed me, then I showed you." So, anyway, I drove across this. Looks like a huge teepee ring. I drove across checking cows for years. And all of a sudden one day I said, "That's the biggest teepee ring I've ever seen, you know, it's 39 feet across it." I says, "How many deer hides would it take to cover that? And where'd they get the poles? You know, there isn't a tree in sight anywhere." So you get to walking around there, but it's just 39 feet across it, and on a north point of the compass is a pile of rocks inside it to make a V, solid V. And on the south point of the compass, there's a smaller deal just like that. And then on the east and west points, there's just a few rocks on those. So it's like a big compass. And as it happens, I think there's a rock right nearly dead center in the thing, but I think that just happened to be there. I don't think that was part of the game. But I took Tom up there, and he walked around this thing, and I guess you kind of had to know Tom Nelson. He was a deep thinker and didn't say much unless he needed to. But he stood on this north point of the compass, and he walked around and stood on the south point, and then on the east and the west, and stands in the middle of this thing and looks in all directions and says, "I could tell you one thing, McColly." I says, "What's that, Tom?" He says, "We ain't the first people that have been here."
Was that on the rim of Rock Creek somewhere up there?
No, it's up on the Tuttle place over. You know what a Tuttle place is?
I know the name, I guess I don't know where.
Well, you know where all of our grain bin sites
Yeah.
are up there? That's the Tuttle place.
Okay.
And that thing is to the south and west of there. Well,
Yeah.
since that time, we've found two more on the place, but they're on the west side, east side of Papoose. And both of them are exactly the same, built the same. The strange part about those are they're only 100 feet apart. So there must have been the Catholics the Catholic Indians here, and the Lutheran Indians over here, and they all had their own church. I don't know.
That also reminds me of.
But this one on the Tuttle place, several years ago, Ruth Warwick, who was a Tolleson, and Teresa Stuber, they were classmates, very good friends, wanted to go for a ride around up there, go to the canyon and this and that. So I took them over and showed them this thing. And Teresa's daughter is an archaeologist down in Utah, I think. Anyway, so she takes a picture of this and texted it to her daughter, and within very short time she says that is exactly what it is. It's a medicine wheel. Now, as I understand it, the Indians were, you know, it's like the circle of earth, you know, what comes goes, and all of to make the whole world work, you had to take care of this, to take care of that, and, you know, the buffalo and all of that stuff. But you know, they must have been a fairly religious type of people, type of thing, you know, to worship whatever they worship, you know.
Yeah, that all reminds me of, I think it's out on the Smith place. Kelton showed me once there was a big arrow laid out in rocks. And I haven't been able to figure out exactly where it was, but it pointed roughly north. But I want to go back and figure out where it was and mark it off, because I'm trying to figure out if it's pointing north or if it's pointing to Miles Crossing. Because it'd be about directly south of it.
Oh, I see what you're saying, a directional arrow type of thing.
Yeah, no, it's, there's a rock here, rock there for 100 feet.
Yeah. Tom Nelson showed me that day out. That's on the Lake Hawk place up there north of where that grave is. There's kind of a slough down there. And he showed me, and he took me along that fence line. There's one spot at that time. Of course, there was a summer that there wasn't much grass. I don't know whether they'd been grazed off or grasshoppers or whatever. So there wasn't much forage out there. But there was a row of rock piles where they'd herded buffalo down, and he figured into that slough down there and bogged some of them, enough of them down to where they could get something to eat, you know.
Yeah. I've heard some people say that there's a buffalo jump somewhere southeast of town somewhere.
Yeah, Christensen's got it out there now.
Yeah, would that be off of Shoemaker, somewhere over there?
Yeah, just east of Shoemaker Road.
Did Kelton work for you guys for a while?
Who?
Kelton.
Melby?
Yep. Oh,
8 years.
How was that?
That's
An
good.
experience. You know, he kind of run his own hours, but he always got the work done.
Yeah.
He was a hard-working individual and played just as hard. But when we put our mind to it, we got a lot of work done at times, you know. He was great with the kids, you know, he loved kids and took care of Mike and Paul, but Linda was kind of his favorite, so she was just a toddler basically at that time. Anyway, I really enjoyed having him around. He was kind of hard on machinery, but he could fix up what he broke, and you never had to worry about it. He just went and he knew what he had to do and went and did it, and you went and did whatever you were doing. But then when you were working together on a project, it went well, and we really enjoyed having him around.
I seem to remember hearing one of the pranks he pulled involved the rain gauge.
On what?
On up there, was it? Did your grandpa and your keep a record of the rain up the ranch for a long time?
No. I was just kind of doing that. He lived down in a trailer a couple 3 miles south of us, but he always ate breakfast, dinner, and supper when he was working. Dana cooked for us, and so he'd come up in the morning and he'd go out and check the rain gauge and come in and drink a coffee at the breakfast table, and he'd tell me how much rain there was, and shit, the damn dust wasn't even hardly settled, you know. But then when you get a good rain, well, you only got 3/10 here. Really? Well, it was years after he quit us I found out that he was either adding water to it or dumping water out of the thing every time and never telling me the truth, you know.
He was a practical joker.
But I like to play cribbage. Every morning, breakfast table, we play 3 games of crib, and every day at noon we play 3 games, and every evening we play 3 games. And if we were feeding at Rock Creek and we was waiting for the tractor to warm up and stuff, we had a crib board in the feed truck, and we'd play crib in the feed truck. And one of my regrets was if we'd have been thinking over the 8 years that he worked for us, if we'd have kept track of how many games each of us had won, I bet you were within just a few, you know.
Well, you might get a kick out of this. I don't think he ever did it, but he always told me that he had a plank of canyon cedar he'd got, I think, while working up with you guys. He'd always wanted to make a cribbage board out of it. always told me that he'd always planned on doing it, but I don't think he ever got it done.
Mm.
It's probably still sitting in that shop somewhere.
Yeah.
So was he working for you guys when the trailer burned?
But what?
Didn't he have a trailer house that burned down on?
Yeah, he decided to quit. He was going to work till the end of the year that year, and it was between Christmas and New Year's when the trailer caught on fire. We don't know why, but yeah.
In fact, that trailer was Aunt Donna's
Oh.
Yeah.
when she lived in
Conrad.
Conrad.
It's always a small world.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a wonderful guy with livestock and good with horses, and yeah, he was just an all-around good guy. He'd do the farming. That wasn't his specialty, but he would do the farming, you know. So never grumbled about it. He was just good guy to have around. Yeah, very dependable.
Well, speaking of horses, I know that was one thing that Michael wanted maybe you to talk a little bit about was the horses.
Costco.
We got a lot of team roping, Melby and I, yeah, but it was just our ranch horses that was using.
But he had a favorite horse, Costco.
I had a couple favorite horses.
But Costco was your.
Yeah, it was
He,
really showy golden palomino with white mane and tail. He was a real show horse. Do anything for you wanted. He's just wonderful. And a couple of boneheads in between them, and then old Mule. You remember Mule? Yeah.
Well, I have some pretty good memories of Mule. Was it the Barner girls that were always giving shots and had the markers, and
Yeah.
he always got a pretty good paint
Branding.
jobs
Paint
when he was
job,
at
yeah.
Brandings with them.
Always decorated him up. Yeah, he was a good horse too. He was really a good ride.
but didn't Mick end up with a horse? Didn't he get a horse at the same time, that same place that you got Mule, or you had them bred?
Yeah, Funk had a trying to think of what the heck his name is out of Dodson. Nicholson stud up there one year, and we took that Roxy horse down and threw it into that bunch of horses and got her bred with that stud. And I don't think that Mick, I don't know whether. Well, to cut to the chase, I know that Fred Bile had a horse out of that stud and a colt out of it, and there was 2 or 3 others around. But that Mule horse was the only one that turned out with a dam.
Yeah.
I think that, I don't know whether Fred's broke a leg or something in a damn car gate, or
I think Mick had one too.
he might have, but if it never turned out to be worth a shit anyway. Mule was the only one out of that whole outfit that was worth a dang. Yeah.
Did you guys always have a dog out at the ranch?
Huh?
Did you always
Yes.
have dogs?
Oh, did we have dogs? Yeah. Yeah, Dad had a. It was kind of a dog thing in the early '70s in the Cache Creek community. Dad got an Australian bitch out of a kennel in Oregon somewheres. And that dog was a year old, but had never been out of the kennel. Never saw a cow. Didn't, you know. It never did work. You know, it was basically a chicken shit when it come to a cow. But Magnus and Betty had a male healer over there, and we bred that bitch several times, and pretty near every one of those dog pups that came out of that bitch were real good dogs, yeah. And they knew what, it was just instinct. They worked for it. You could, I had a couple dogs that went about everywhere with me. And one of them was a outside dog. If you were on a horse, you could send that dog out, get cows. And the other, the semi-chubby one, would just follow along until that other one got buffaloed by a cow, and then she'd go over and decoy that cow while the other one chewed his leg off, you know. That worked well. But then when you're in the corral, the outside dog would just sit outside the corral, and the other would work the chutes and stuff for you inside the corral. So it was really a good team of dogs, you know. But they had an aversion to cats. They love cats, but mostly just to kill. By the time those dogs left, you could walk in the barn and the mice would just get up and just migrate out of there. There were so many mice. And we just had to, we finally got rid of those two dogs. They like chicken too.
Once a dog gets into chickens, they'll always be in chickens.
Yeah, well, anyway, kind of had enough of that. But
How was it raising kids up on the ranch?
you know, I don't think it was any different than when I was growing up. You know, you just kind of ran the place, and them kids better kind of start to work out for themselves, you know, and you kind of herd them away from the really dangerous stuff. But Mike was he was out in the garden playing tractors and trucks and stuff, and Paul was always tearing around doing something. Linda was always with Melby and me. So we turned her into a tomboy. She was a good hand, you know.
I've heard stories that who did she wrestle at Brandings with?
Oh,
Her and-
Jessica Reinhardt. Yeah, they were two of the best calf wrestlers that ever came out of that country.
It goes to show that it's about skill, it's not about size.
Yeah. But when Linda she just went everywhere with Kelton and I. And we were going up north there, I don't know, around the Tuttle Nelson place or something like that. And Linda says, "What's that?" Well, she's pointing at the power line. The old Cal just said, "That's a giraffe fence." And that was the end of the story, you know.
She believed it.
And about a year or so later, we're up at Bluff Creek up there, dinking with cows and stuff. Old Linda comes over and says, "Must not be any giraffes up here." Oh, man. Oh, that was funny.
Yeah, you were talking about Kelton pulling some pranks, but I remember one you pulled on me when I was, 6 years old? You guys came over for my birthday party, and I opened up a present, and there's a foot inside of it.
Yeah, I remember that.
I was very confused.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you don't have to tell the story if you don't want, but I don't think I've ever heard the full story of how you lost your leg.
Oh. Well, yeah, that was a kind of a nasty winter day. It's on the 12th of January, 93. And the kids were, Paul and Linda, they were in school, and Mike had went back to college, and Clark Laycock had quit working for us the fall before. So I was feeding by myself, and we had Kelton and I built a grain box on the back of it was a Forest Service, short box Forest Service pickup. Took the box off, and then we just built this grain tank on it to grain the cows and stuff, and that's what I was feeding with. And the cows were at Rock Creek down here, and I hauled this tank load of grain down every day, and had an auger in it, auger this grain out for the cows, and then I'd feed the baled hay and the likes of that. And that particular day was about, as I remember, was about 10 below maybe, or something like that, with a 10 or 15 mile an hour wind blowing straight out of the north. It's a cold day. But Dana had a vacuum cleaner that she was waiting for a belt for the beater. She broke the belt on her vacuum cleaner beater. And when I got done feeding at Rock Creek, I just come to town to check the post office to see if that was there. And it wasn't, but anyway, I was headed back home just before noon. I don't know, 11:45 maybe or something, I don't know. So it was about in there. And I'm going up the road and I get about a mile off the end of the blacktop, and I have no idea how fast I'm going, probably 50, I'm guessing, 45, 50. And this short wheelbase pickup didn't have any weight in it other than this tank that we built. The grain was empty, so it was pretty light. And I'm driving down the road, and all of a sudden, I'm driving down the road backwards at 45 or 50 miles an hour. I just swapped ends. And of course, it was in about the worst place it could be. It was where there's a gravel pit there, deep excavation, so they'll fill the. It was a long ways down there. And I'm trying to get this pickup turned around, so I'm going to go in the ditch straight in backwards, you know. Well, that didn't happen, so the next thing I know, the pickup's sitting over there on its wheels, over there, and I'm sitting on top of the tarp, the grain tarp that was on top of this tank. I'm sitting on top of it over here, and I don't know how long I was knocked out or if I was or not, but I mean, you know, things kind of went dark, and so I got up to go get back in the pickup, and it was on its wheels, and I was going to, I broke my leg here, and I could feel those bones crunching getting back to the pickup, but I got in there, and I noticed that the bottom of my boot's gone. And so I said, well, I'm kind of in trouble here. I thought, well, I'll just drive down to the trailer house where Kelton lived, or where there was a phone there at that time. And I gets in the pickup, and the battery's laying out there about 20 feet in front of the pickup, so I knew that wasn't going to happen. We didn't have any radios, and there wasn't no cell phones or nothing. So I said, well, I've got to bundle up. So, and the four-wheel drive shifter down here, I had an old white towel stuffed in that to keep the wind from blowing up it, and my mittens and some of my gear is laying scattered out over there in front to the right of the pickup. So I got out and walked around and gathered all of that stuff up and got back in the pickup. The snow was about that deep walking around in it. And I got back in the pickup, and I figured I needed to get that end of my foot, the front, my toes were gone too. I needed to get that covered up so it didn't freeze. And I thought, well, I had some of those thermal line mittens, and I thought, well, maybe I could pull one of them over it. Well, I couldn't get it stretched enough to get over, so anyway, I wraps it up with this towel that I had, and then I took my Carhartt off, and I had a lined shirt on under that, and I took it off and put my Carhartt back on, and wrapped that lined shirt around it too. But the doors are open on this pickup, and the wind's blowing in there. Well, by golly, I had an old pair of jumper cables in there, and I got the doors pulled closed, and I got those jumper cables hooked on the latches and pulled tight so the doors were closed so to keep the wind out of it. Anyway, the pickup was sitting directly downwind, fortunately. It was directly downwind. And I knew I'd met Wade Nelson hauling grain for Lamb in Malta about at the Rock Creek turnoff when I was coming north. And him and Mike Tribley always hauled grain together. I don't know, they were hauling from up north somewhere, where I don't know where they were hauling grain from. but I met Wade down at the Rock Creek turnoff. So I knew that there was another truck coming. And I didn't know whether it was Mike Tribby or who it was. But anyway, I'm sitting there and I can hear this truck coming. I've been sitting there for some time. I don't know how long. Perhaps a half an hour, perhaps 45 minutes or something. I don't know. Somewhere's in that. I was getting cold. I was getting really cold. And I could hear this truck coming. And I started waving my arm out the window at this guy. And he wasn't going to stop because he thought that thing had been there when he went up, But he sees me waving my arm and he comes down and I says, boy, you've got to unhook that pup and get down here and get me in your truck. I said, I'm cold. I'm really cold. And he was just at that time, he was unhooking his pup from his truck when Dana comes along. And I don't know how many times in my life I've been late for dinner. I don't think you could count them on an abacus. But that particular day, she was concerned, and it was about all the two of them could do to get me out of that pickup and in that little S10 to get me to town. But T.J. Kendall was the truck driver's name. Met him years later. His wife works for Doc Curtis up at the clinic up in Moulton. Anyway, Dana got me to town and got me to here, and then I called the ambulance service and got me in and got me. God, when I started warming up in the hospital, all I wanted to do was anything, put me under. I got hurt. But what happened is this old military pickup that I was driving, when I went in the ditch, of course the door latches don't work very good, but it's got a little step. When you open the door, there's a little step about like that, and then it goes up to in the pickup. Well, while I was flying around in this pickup, my legs were sticking out under the door. This leg was under the door where that step was, and this one was stuck in the hinge area of the door. And when the pickup rolled over, it shut the door. So it cut off the front of my foot and it broke the bones in this one so that it was crushed. And I never did figure out why all of a sudden I'm going backwards down the road until years later. I was talking to an ex-patrolman in Glasgow by the name of Jack Nelson. And he said, yeah, I went up and looked at that. He said, do you know what happened? I says, I have no idea what happened. I'm driving down the road, pretty soon I'm shooting backwards down the road. There was an young sagebrush grew alongside the road, and the wind had been blowing out of the southeast and put a snowdrift partially across the road. And it was pretty hard. When my right front tire hit that thing, swapped the pickup around. And that was kind of the end of the story. Yeah, very lucky, but I can tell you, I told the good Lord that I was in trouble here, and I think that you can't tell me about divine guidance. It happens. There was no reason for her to come looking for me when she did, but I was sure glad that she did. That was a scary deal. I never bled a drop. Thought I was going to freeze to death.
That's what doctor said, that the reason he didn't, because it was so cold. That being cold saved his life.
I can imagine.
But I can tell you 10 weeks in a wheelchair is enough for me. Don't need that anymore. That was the best day of my life when they took me to Great Falls and built some legs for me.
I still remember a couple times that I've stopped over to drop something off or just say hi, and you've had to apologize. I can't get up and say hi. My legs are off.
Yeah. Oh, they still bother me some, but I'm functional.
Yeah, well, we're glad you're here. So I guess, happy or no, what were holidays like growing up? Where'd you do Christmas? Where'd you do Thanksgiving?
Oh, well, the Nelson family was pretty big into holiday stuff. And because there was so many of those siblings, there were 6 siblings, we never did lots with the McColly family on most holidays, I guess. I don't know. Of course, the McColly family was scattered to the 3 winds too. Jay Clark was on the East Coast in Maryland, and Gertrude was at Scobie, and Donna was at Conrad, and so the McColly family was, other than Grandpa was here, you know, but the Nelson family, everybody was still kind of around here. And each of those McColleys, the 2 McColleys, was the smallest group of that whole outfit. There was 5 Asvigs, and there was 3 those Nelsons, and a couple or 3 other Nelsons, and 3 Palmers, and yeah, and it seemed like Easter, we were always at Old Eldon and Leona's for that, in that little dink of a house, and you know, there was maybe 15 kids tearing around there, you know, and they'd kick our ass out the door and get out of here. And Thanksgiving, they were up at the ranch a lot for Thanksgiving. Christmas was always at Grandma Nelson's in that little dink of a house over there. And when everybody had come up to our place up at the ranch, we'd go upstairs, and every dang old piece of clothes that the folks ever had was stored in the north room, and we'd get all dressed up, or they'd kick us out. And some of us older, but Ronnie and I, and some of us, you know, the boys would take off on going nature hikes around the hills and stuff over there. But there was always gobs of kids, and they're all raised at the cane, and they'd chase you out of the house so they had a little time to themselves. Yeah, always had big meals at holidays. Sometimes at Easter we'd go to Glasgow at Oldie and Norma's. But always had fun. I don't know how the parents put up with us all. Yeah, that was wild times in Genevieve. That's a big deal.
Didn't someone lose an ear?
Oh, yeah. Well, Vaughn Grady and Willie Koppel got in a fight up there, and Koppel chewed the top of Vaughn Grady's ear off. Vaughn Grady was twice as big as that other guy, but he wasn't as fast, apparently. Yeah, big deal between the Hinsdale and Seiko, a lot of rivalry. So Bud Hill was up there one time getting all the Hinsdale people to stand on one side of the road and all the Seiko people to get on the other side of the road, then they're going to have a brawl. And I think Bear went over and co-cocked old Hillman and knocked him cold, and that was the end of the fight. I'm not sure. I've heard rumors about this. Bear made mention of it once, and I asked my dad about it, but that was the end of that story. Is what Bear said was somebody pitched a live coyote through the Genevieve window during a dance one time. And the best I could figure out, it was Bob McColly that pitched the coyote through the window.
I've never heard mention of that in all my research of Genevieve. I've heard a few bits and pieces here, but I've not heard that one.
And the reason I think of that, because when my dad was going to get roasted at the shrine roast one time, I went over to Bear's to see if I could dig up any dirt on him to roast him with, you know. And Bear had made mention about this coyote getting pitched through the Genevieve window during a dance. And he didn't say it was my dad, but he strongly suggested that it could have been. How's that? But when I mentioned it to my dad, that was, I don't know what you're talking about.
Wasn't going to fess up to that one.
Yeah.
So what are some of the biggest changes you've seen over the years between town, the ranch, the community? What's
Boy, how do you even start with that?
well, what are the things that you
Biggest
miss?
change is that there isn't anybody who lives here anymore. You know, when I was in high school, there was like maybe 75 kids in high school. Wasn't any paved roads through town or nothing. It was all gravel streets. Boy, weekend nights, the dust in this town would be just as high as the trees. You know, I don't know how the people that nobody had any air conditioners, so they all had their windows open. Those houses must have just been filthy dirty all the time, you know, because kids are just tearing around. And everybody had a car, you know, tearing around. Yeah. Yeah, there's, I don't know how many kids are in school up there now, maybe 25 in high school.
Yeah.
Lots of people around the communities and nobody's there. You gotta be able to make a living to stay, and people get old and retire and somebody buy their place up and add it to theirs and get bigger equipment. And life goes on. Pretty soon there's nobody around. And I don't know what the solution to that is. There isn't one. An easy one for sure.
What's been one of the best changes over the years?
As far as farming's concerned, say?
No, what? Farming, life, and community, anything.
Well, I would, you know, everybody kind of, in the small communities, and I don't think that this Hinsdale is unique in that, but all of these small communities, people look after one another. They help each other. If you're in need or in something, people are there to lend a hand or whatever they can do. And I think as soon as you get into bigger communities and stuff, that kind of goes out the door. Pretty soon you talk to people that they don't even know who their neighbors are, you know. I know in this area anyway, people are very generous when somebody needs a benefit or needs some help or anything. People are just willing to do that. I think as far as the farming game is concerned, and I think the biggest improvement is the day, and I shouldn't brag this up, but whether Ralph Nader had anything to do it or if it was some other person, or anyway, when the government made machinery manufacturers put a rollover protective structure on tractors. And the reason I say that is, before that, everybody had an open tractor, you know, and you were in the elements, and you were, you were in the elements. And then in the early to mid 60s, they started putting cabs on tractors, all right. So you could sit in there with your Carhartts on in the spring seeding, and the cold wind would blow around you anyway, made you feel better. But the noise factor in those tractors was terrible, you know. But when they started putting rollover protective structures on tractor cabs and the likes, then they could insulate them, and they could soundproof them, and they could heat them and cool them so you're in an environment where you could stand it. And you didn't, you know, the early years, that's why my hearing is so bad, is we had a 930 case of the cab, but when we bought a 145 Versatile, It was just a square box, and the sound in there just echoed around. And of course, when you're in your late teens, you gotta have a radio, so you put a radio in there and crank it up. So then you can't hear it very good, so you put headphones on, you crank it up some more, and those years that I run that from 12 hours a day. I usually run from 6 at night to 6 in the morning. And if I was running daytime shift, 6 to 6 at night, about 3 in the morning is when your ears would quit ringing. And then 3 hours later, you're back in it, you know. Well, it doesn't take much of that, and pretty soon, what'd you say? You know. And a lot of people are in the same situation as I am, you know. But when they started putting good cabs on tractors, it's all the difference in the world. Big advancement in livestock, horse trailers. Before that, you had a truck, you had to put the stock rack up to go haul a horse somewhere, or you had a stock rack in your pickup, but yeah, and then haul calves a little short one axle truck, and you hoped you got done hauling calves before it got cold, so the bedding in it wasn't froze down. You had to clean a frozen bedding out, but horse trailers, number one. Yeah. No doubt about it.
What was your favorite meal that your mom would cook?
My favorite what?
Meal that your mom would cook you.
Oh man, that's a tough one. Wow. She kind of had I'll tell you, I can't think of a bad meal my mom ever cooked. I ate everything she made. But maybe a favorite was, she kind of had some, and I don't know how she did it, just threw it all together, but she had some kind of a Corningware dish type of thing or something like that. And that was some kind of pulled pork or shredded meat or something with a kind of a tomato ketchup sauce or something, I don't know. And then she'd cover that with mashed potatoes about that thick on top of that, and bacon. And yeah, I always went for that, but about everything my mother and my wife cooked, I eat. No complaints there.
Mm-hmm.
So.
How was getting married? How was dealing with in-laws and growing the family?
Well, I think the pond's starting to get thin ice on it.
It was a rough start.
Yeah, it wasn't the smoothest road there for a while, but Dana's mother, I was kind of a renegade, to put it politely. You know, I was not a model citizen. And Dana's mother didn't really take too kindly to that. But she tolerated me. You know, I mean, she was nice to me, but you could tell there was some friction there, and I don't think she wanted me hanging around her oldest daughter. Okay. Now her dad's a different game. He loved me. He said I was a good guy, you know. Or at least that's the way he came across to me. But as the years went by, I must have wore Edith down to the point she didn't care anymore. Or at least that's the way it appeared. But I made a comment one time when we were at Terry's wedding in Troy. He was taking a family picture. And I got to look around, and all of Dana's siblings were there, and Mom and Dad, and me. I look around. Hell, I'm the only one that's only been married once. And I should have kept my mouth shut, but I mean, it was true. But, yeah.
Well,
We've certainly had our rough times together.
Way to
No,
go.
everybody does, I think. But basically, we get along fine. You know, we have our arguments once in a while, and she always wins. And one time I told her, and this was maybe 25 years ago, I said, I'm too old to argue with you anymore.
It didn't take long for Mom to like Drew to like him. Yeah, love him. Yeah, well,
There was a time when Gilbert Mogan was dating Dana's sister, Lana, briefly, and Edith would invite us out to dinner on Sundays out the place out there. They always had a big Sunday dinner, and sometimes when I took Dana home, somehow or another, an empty beer can or two would end up out in the driveway. I don't know how it got there, okay? Yeah. One day, Gilbert's sitting there, we're all sitting around the table eating. Edith says to Gilbert, says, Gilbert, I wish you'd quit kicking your empty beer cans out when you bring Lana home. So, anyway, that didn't happen very often.
now I know my dad's talked a little bit about when, you know, he was in high school and you guys were up there that he would go help you guys once in a
yeah.
while.
Oh, yeah.
he was up there a lot.
Yeah, Dwayne and Mark would come up and ride and help move cows. And
Yeah.
we reciprocated, you know, I went down and helped them a lot. It was just a good deal. Yeah, when we were first going together, Jesus, that Mark was a pain in the ass. A little brat. Just wanted to take it, slap him up a little bit, you know, spoiled little shit. But he grew out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he grew up too.
Yeah. That one year that he helped us when he must have been a senior in high school and
Oh,
trying to get up Crow Creek Hill. And he was driving.
oh, yeah. Yeah. That was a good. Pulled a trailer up there in Muddy Road up Crow Creek Hill. He was not an experienced driver at that time, but he didn't have a four-wheel drive or something. I don't know. It didn't work very good. I guess the good Mark Johnson story that really is good. I don't know. Dwayne and Edith must have been gone somewhere, as best I know, because it was like Thanksgiving when we got Mark up there for Thanksgiving dinner or something, wasn't it? Was it Thanksgiving
I
or
can't remember.
a Sunday or anyway, maybe it was just a Sunday or something, but Dwayne and Edith must have been gone to somewhere, whether they went to Baker or wherever, it don't matter. But Mark was up at our place. Dina sent me down to the basement after some milk out of the refrigerator or something. I don't know what I went down there for, but I could hear water running. And I says, well, why is there water running down here? Hell, there isn't even any water on this side of the house. So I crawls up there and up on the banking underneath the house over on the west side, there's a damn rattlesnake laying under there just going, you know. So I guess I goes upstairs and he gets a shotgun. And Mark comes down there and I goes up there and I blast this snake. And had Mark crawl up there. There was a chunk of CB antenna with little aerials on the end of it. Have him drag the damn thing out of there. And Mark went over and he touched that snake with that. And that snake went like this and started rattling again. And Mark just about stomped me to death getting out of there. But when I shot Mr. Snake the second time with the 12 gauge, we got him out then. But man, the dust down in there, oh, that was something. Oh, Mark just about turned himself inside out getting out of there. That's when, after that, I went and caulked all the holes in the banking so the snakes couldn't come in. Ask your dad about that someday. I'm sure he remembers it vividly.
Now, isn't there a good story about Paul when he was real little in the mud?
Well, there was a lot of stories about
Yeah.
Oh, is there?
Yeah.
Couple on Mike when he was young.
Yeah.
He's never had enough water up at the ranch when we had cattle in there, so Dana'd be up in the middle of the night washing clothes. And anyway, I had a water tank out back and some a water trough, and I was hauling water from down on the creek up there on a truck in a 500-gallon tank. It was springtime and everything was soup, just green soup.
He might have been 2.
Yeah, I backed up to the water tank and went back to turn the valve on and looks out, and Mike crawled out of that truck and was walking in that stuff, and it might have hell about to his knees, I suppose. And then he fell down, sitting on his butt in that thing, and it was up to about here on him, you know. And it was like he was stuck. He couldn't move. I grabbed him and I shook as much of it off as I could. And I carried him to the house just like that, knocked on the door. Here's your kid. He had a snowsuit on and oh God.
It was a mess. Yeah.
He was riding with me going down the Rock Creek Hill to an old Tin Lizzie. And standing on the seat beside me. And he fell asleep. He goes, and I grabbed his goddamn belt just as he was going out the window. After that, when the kids fell asleep, they laid him down on the seat. Yeah, he just tipped over and was going out the window. Yeah, Paul was, I guess you could say that Paul was semi-accident prone. If it was going to happen, it was going to happen to Paul anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but they all grew up healthy and happy, and look back on it, couldn't ask for a much nicer family. There you go.
So how was it going from being on the ranch and raising kids to, all of a sudden your kids on the ranch raising your grandkids, being grandparents and living in town?
Yeah.
That was the transition to a grandfather, Ben.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
it was different moving town. I'll tell you, every time we go up the ranch and stuff, I still miss being able to see as far as you can see up there, Boy, when we lived up there, you go out at night and you can see every star in the sky. And at one time when the Old Pine radar base was functional, you could see the street lights of the Old Pine radar base from the ranch, and you could see the Little Rockies, Saco. If you went down on the corner by where that microwave tower is, then you could see Hinsdale, and you could see Glasgow, until they built all the stuff up by the weather station stuff, and you could see the lights on the Fort Peck Dam from up there.
Wow.
So, see a long, long ways.
That radio tower there has been there for quite a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, they built that I think they built that while I was laid up with my legs.
Yeah. Well, that little one was been there for
Oh yeah,
years.
there was a little telephone tower. They put that up
Years.
that was in the 60s.
Yeah.
And they had one over Bob Weesey's over there too. And what those were for is the old time radar base. Because of the government, and it was a military thing, they had to have at least 2 lines of communications. If something happened to one, they could still go through the other. After they put the new underground phone line in and stuff, they tore that one out. But that WAPA tower is transmission from Fort Peck to Malta on the new power line that they put through from Havre to Fort Peck.
If I remember right, I believe Kelton said he climbed the tower once.
I think he might have been stretching. He might have climbed up a ways, but I don't think he crawled the top. I think he might have been stretching that one.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Sure
I don't know that.
He probably stretched a few.
I don't know that, but I don't think he, yeah. I'm not saying he couldn't have.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, the story was he had to take 3 beers with him, one for the way up, one for at the top, and one on the way down.
Well, he
That
might
could
have.
be.
I wouldn't have put it past him, but I don't know that.
I don't think I would have done it.
I can't back that story up.
You wouldn't get me up first. I'm scared of heights now.
But Kelton did have a way of embellishing some stories because I was there, you know. And you just keep your mouth shut, and it's his story. Let it go, you know.
Well, have you ever listened to the little video that he did with Luke back when Luke was probably a kindergartner? I got that on, most of it online. I had to do a history project for 3rd grade. I think I was just supposed to fill the sheet in. It said interview your grandparents and ask them these questions. I think you're just supposed to write down the answers. But I was like, oh, it's an interview. I have to be like a TV reporter. And so Mom got the video recorder, and that's why we have those videos
That's where you got
of
your
Grandma
story.
and Grandpa and Sharon. But Luke felt left out. So after I did Sharon's, he wanted to do one. So Kelton said, well, I'll do one with you. Well, Kelton knew it wasn't for anything, so he just made shit up. Kelton had a twin brother named Fred, and they only had 1 horse between all of them. So when you weren't on the horse, you had to run up behind the cows and bark like a dog. But because it was his twin brother, he would always say, no, I'm Fred, so we could get 2 turns and all this. And every time Luke would laugh, ha 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 ha. Kelton, are you lying? No. But the funny thing is, I think by the end he actually started telling some true stories, but I'll never know because I can't tell them apart. Once in a while I go back and watch that and I just sit there and smile.
Yeah. Well, that's where you got your start.
No. Well, yeah, between that and, I'm sure quite a bit of it comes from just being descendant of Donna, all of that.
Yeah.
But then, probably the big thing that really started it was when I did the little history project with Edry. She was sure thrilled that I was doing that for school.
Oh yeah. Well, she loved that.
She did the whole project for us. I got that and I was like, crap, we're going to get in trouble because it looks like I plagiarized this. I think they wanted like 2 or 3 pages, and I had 8 pages of that yellow legal pad of the whole history of town.
Yeah, well, she was a good historian.
Yeah, and I remember I brought a tape recorder along with me you don't need that, I got it all written down.
Yeah.
Halfway through I snuck it on, it's here somewhere, I don't know where you guys put it, but...
You remember when there was a water tower, the great big water tower in Glasgow? It's there now? By the schoolhouse?
Probably not.
I don't think
You know the water tower I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The big one. Well, there was a smaller one that was off just a ways from there. Well, a smaller one, a little compared to that great big one. It looked small. But that water tower came from Hinsdale.
Oh.
It was up by the railroad tracks, right where the Senate crossed from the highway from the Senate station. And, well, yeah, you go up that street right over there, Ohio Street, and it was right across the road over there. And it was built for the railroad. They had a water pump over here, right here, going down the park. There's where I think they pumped it, or over there or somewhere. Anyway, they got water out of wherever it's over, out of river water, and over where by the school where that Bob Yeoman's place was, there was a treatment plant there to take the iron minerals and stuff out of the water.
Take the mud out of the Milk River?
Yeah, and then they pumped it up to that tower for the steam engines so that there wasn't fall in their boilers and stuff was what it was for. To take the iron and the and the crap out, you know, the chemicals out of it, so that it wasn't screwing up their tubes and their boilers. Well, that water tower, when they built that, my dad said when they got done with that, the iron workers, one guy stood on his head on the ball on the roof of that thing. One of the iron workers did when they got done with that tower, that water tower. And it sat there for years. Well, after it went to diesel electric trains, they didn't need it, you know. It wasn't ever part of the Hinsdale water system because that water came from up by Clinn's up there. But then they moved that to Glasgow and refurbished it and used it at Glasgow, I don't know, for a long time. And then when they built that great big water tower, they didn't need it anymore. Reinhardt was a commissioner then when they cut the legs out from it, toppled it over and salvaged it. But Dad said that one iron worker stood on his head on the ball on the roof of that thing.
And that would have been quite a sight.
Yeah.
The little metal jail cell that they got at the museum there in Glasgow, was that from Hinsdale?
The what?
The jail cell that they
Oh,
got?
yeah. Yeah, that used to be in the old water house. That was there when I was in school. That was really handy. Your Uncle Mike and some of that class, they were 8th graders when we were seniors. And every day, them kids, you know, our senior year towards spring, those kids knew shit was going to happen, so they'd hurry up and gobble their food down as fast as they could and get the hell out of school. And then all of the senior boys, it was like an Easter egg on trying to run them little boogers down and do something. There was a few of them spent a while in that jail cell in there.
Yeah. I've seen a few pictures. It looks like the FFA used it for a float once in a while for
Yeah.
4th of July.
Yeah.
I suppose in the early days, if they had some drunk or something that was raising Cain or something, they could throw them in there. At least they knew where they were and let them out in the morning or something, you know. They sobered up. Or, it was pretty crude, but it was effective, I guess. Transportation wasn't very good, so you couldn't run them down to Glasgow and throw them into Clink. And I guess mostly, probably what it was disruptive drunks or something, you know, that was raising Cain. I don't know. Before my time. It was never in use when I was in there, except for when we were throwing them kids in there. Threatened to leave them there forever, you know.
Do you remember when the depot burned down?
Yes. I wasn't around when it was doing it. I don't even think I was in town when it was still smoldering, but I remember when it happened. I don't know if you've ever heard the story on that.
I've heard quite a bit of it, but I'm not sure I've heard all of it.
Well, as it turned out, the feds came in, and because there was a money shipment in that thing, and they came in to salvage what they could and figure out what caused the fire and all that stuff. And when they were sifting through the ashes and the likes, they found some melted silver and the likes of that, but it didn't amount to what they said was there, but they couldn't find any paper money at all, any ashes of paper money or anything. So they had suspected that it was a fire to cover up a robbery. And this went on for some time, and Bud Hillman was the one that actually broke the case for him. The guy that was the depot agent up here was depositing the damn money in his own account in the Hinsdale Bank. And Bud caught on to it, and yeah, they got the guy. That's exactly, he must not have been too bright, you know, to be putting it in your own bank account when you're with everybody knew what his salary was, you know, and then all of a sudden he's dumping more money into his, in the local bank, you know, so he couldn't have been real bright.
Yeah, small town.
Yeah. But Bud Hillman was the one that caught on to it.
Did they do much with the train after that? I'm assuming they didn't really rebuild anything.
No, no, that was the end of it. They kind of built a little, well, what, I guess it isn't even there now, is it? There's nothing there. They built it, yeah, they did build a new, but it wasn't like the old depot, you know, wooden structure with a loading dock and all of that stuff. But when I was a kid, what little I was in town, I wasn't never hardly in town much until started school, and then not much then. I'd ride the bus back home. But as I got older, I would spend some time in town with my grandparents or whatever, or get to run around, ride a bike around, raise hell. But used to have the mail car. They would pick up the mail in Hinsdale and sort the mail as they were going down the track, and then like whatever went to Glasgow, they would drop off at Glasgow and that way. But anything that was leaving Hinsdale, they put in a leather satchel with a couple leather handles on it, you know, like a big leather purse type of thing. And they had a hook along the track out there. They'd Carey Brothers or whoever was running the mail would go up there and hang that on there, and then when the train went through, they'd snag it with a hook out of their rail car, out of the train car, mail car, and bring it in. But every once in a while they would miss it and knock it off the thing. And I don't, several times, I don't know, myself and I have no idea. Scooter Hillman probably, or I don't know who. They'd run down the track and pick that bag up and take it back to the depot for them, that type of stuff.
I feel like I remember hearing at some point that there might have been a train derailment or some stuff got thrown out of the train at some point. Was that east of town?
Yes, well, about everywhere. In town one time.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I heard one that there was a bunch of stuff got thrown everywhere and people were going and...
Oh, that was out at the crossing out east of town on that one. But before that, there was a derailment right in town. And I don't know how many cars come off the track there, but one of those box cars was laying, the top of it was touching the highway right across the road from Eldon Nelson's machine shop.
Oh, really?
I don't know how many got tipped over there, a bunch of box cars and stuff. That one east of town, I think that was mostly containers and stuff like that. You know. Yeah, there was all kinds of things in there. That was Thanksgiving Day or day before Thanksgiving or something. Paying local farmers bring their truck in to help haul stuff to Glasgow or to somewhere to say we're picking it up. And I'm not so sure there hasn't been back in those days. They had those those boxings, you know, instead of bearings on the wheels, and get a hot box or something, and dang, a wheel would come off or a rail would fall apart. I bet there's a dang derailment in every mile of track from here to Seattle.
Was there a co-op that ran the elevator, or was that its own company, or?
That was it was a co-op, but it didn't have anything to do with the oil station. Had their own elevator company.
Did you ever haul grain in there?
Oh yeah, we did. Yeah. A lot of grain. Until the railroads made it to where they had to have unit trains or 52 car trains to be competitive. Well, when that happened, these small elevators couldn't stay competitive with the outfits that could ship 52 or 100 cars. And that was the beginning of the end. Still load up 2 or 3 cars or something, or put some on a truck van and get it out of there, but yeah, it wasn't cost effective. I was on the elevator board when they built the newest elevator in Glasgow, and that was built to handle 52 cars, but because it was in the middle of town, it was a pain, and they had to split the thing 3 times to get that many cars in there. And then you had to disrupt all the traffic in Glasgow as the train was loading, and we had to tear all the old track out and spend $1 million to put new track in there, and then give it to the railroad, elevator company, because it was on railroad ground. It was a railroad rail. And I don't think it was within a year or so after we built that to handle 52 cars that then they made it 110 car units, so about the only thing it still handles some grain down there, but it's not an effective elevator for sure compared to these ones with a loop on it, that fill out 100 cars in 3 or 4 hours type of thing. So, yeah, I don't know what's going to be like in another 20 years. Price of grain better come up or there won't be any farmers in another 20 years.
So if there's one day you could go back and live again, what day would it be?
I don't have an answer for that. I really don't.
And that's fine.
No, I really don't have an answer for that.
Well, I asked Daryl Rosendahl that, and he said that there was a specific day riding with Grandpa Johnny Portine that he would go back and live back every day if he could.
Mm. Yeah.
Were there any other stories you want?
Well, I know that there's a lot of times, when I was growing up, Grandpa McColly passed away when I was 27. So I had that many years of being around him, and I was around him a lot as a youngster. But then again, after we got married and got to spend, even my young adulthood before I was my teen years and stuff, he would tell all of these stories about people that were lived up around him up there, and things that had happened in the community, and I had heard these stories time and time and time again. And I says, well, I'll never forget them. And within a year, I'll bet I couldn't remember half of them. So that's certainly a regret. And I don't know if there's a day that, for sure not a week that doesn't go by, that I'd like to have an answer on something from either my mom or my dad. So, but, yeah, just all those old time stories from the grandpa had, and they were all about the people who lived around and their perils and that type of stuff, And he would tell them and tell them and tell them, and I guess they're gone and forgotten. Certainly forgotten.
Well, were there any final stories or thoughts you wanted on the record for your kids or grandkids?
I guess the only thing I can say about any of my kids and grandkids is that they've all got a good head on their shoulders. And they know what's right and what's wrong, and they'll do fine. I'm proud of them all. And I think that Dana had a good share to do with that. Maybe most of it. So, But they all got a work ethic, and they all have a good head on their shoulders. So I think that that's a good time to turn the camera off.